So let's start the second part of the morning. So the next talk will be given by Victor. So Victor is a postdoc in one of our international chair, the one by Thomas Serre. So Thomas Serre is at Brown University, working on the visual system, and Victor will talk about reverse engineering our visual system.
Yeah, so hello everyone. So I am Victor, and here I will present the last update from the chair called Reverse Engineering the Visual System. So this chair is supervised by Thomas, but as he could not make it today, I'm here to represent the chair during the NET days. So as you might already know, some of the most advanced deep neural networks are actually achieving a similar level of performance to that of humans on the more challenging visual recognition task. So it could be, for example, image recognition or face recognition. And here on this slide, you can see the evolution of these neural networks trained on the ImageNet challenge. So these kind of neural networks are providing neuroscientists with great opportunities because this is the first time in history we have access to computational tools that are powerful enough to replicate and model some of the brain capabilities. But when one is seeing this kind of curve, one might actually think that biological vision is a solved problem, because indeed, since 2017, approximately, you can observe that models tend to overperform human performance. But one needs to keep in mind that biological vision and artificial vision are two distinct systems. So as such, it's not because they are showing the same level of performance that they are actually sharing the same strategy to solve the underlying task. So here, object recognition. And one great experiment to illustrate this point is through adversarial attacks. So here, for example, we have a small image. So this image has been properly classified as a cat by a neural network, but one can easily fool the neural network by adding a small amount of structured noise. And this noise is invisible to the naked eyes, so that at the end of this process, the image on the right-hand side look exactly the same than the one on the left-hand side. But the main difference is that this image, this time, has been classified as an ostrich. And I'm sure that here, no one in the room would consider that this small cat is actually an ostrich. So this kind of experiment is highlighting the fact that neural networks and humans are leveraging different types of features to solve the classification task. So basically, we are adopting different strategies than neural network to solve the same task. The goal of the chair here is actually to bridge the gap between artificial vision and biological vision. And to do so, we train IA systems using tasks that are strongly inspired from cognitive science. And in general, we carefully chose those tasks so that they can highlight some key computational mechanism in the brain. So for example, in the chair, we have developed a novel benchmark strongly inspired by non-visual reasoning tests. And these benchmarks allow us to evaluate the generalization abilities of neural network when they are trained with a limited number of data. So interestingly, the only way for neural network to properly perform on this kind of benchmark is to leverage one crucial point that we are using as a human being. This is the compositional structure of the data set. And with this kind of benchmark, we have demonstrated that actually neural networks that have a convolutional-based architecture tend to overpass those that are based on transformers. So to improve the generalization abilities of transformer-based architecture, we have combined two key brain mechanisms, the memory and the attention. So our new architecture can actually dynamically shift its attention so that it can route task-relevant information into a memory bank. And this kind of architecture has proven to be sample efficient and to be really good at solving complex visual reasoning tasks. And we are also collaborating with Ruffin von Rullen, and we demonstrate in this collaboration that neurons in complex networks tend to synchronize together so that similar objects in an image are binded. This mechanism is called the binding by synchrony in neuroscience and is thought to play a crucial role for humans to make sense of complex scenes. So in the chair, we are not only getting inspired by neuroscience to improve IA system, but we are also developing new explainability artificial intelligence system to better understand both the brain and the machine. And we are also using this system to force IA system to be better aligned with human strategies. One important line of work here has been to improve current explainability method, and this is a pending collaboration with the DEAL team. So for example, we have unlocked feature visualization in the deepest neural network. So meaning that now, in the chair, we are able to visualize the feature that has been leveraged by the deepest neural network to solve a classification task. We are also actively working at developing better concept-based extraction method so that now we can extract and identify the concepts that are considered important for a neural network in its decision process. This line of work culminated with the Lens website, and I strongly encourage you to visit this website. This is just a great website, and here you can browse all the category of the ImageNet dataset, and you can visualize the features and the concept that have been leveraged by your ResNet network. And here is an example of what you can observe on this website. So here I have selected the three main concepts for ResNet 50 to categorize an ostrich. So you can observe that the neural network tends to rely on concepts as, for example, the neck, but also the eye or the feathers of the ostrich to classify it. And this is interesting because if you ask me as a human being to describe an ostrich, I will likely refer to the same type of concept. So it does suggest that actually explainability method could be used to compare humans and machines. And this is also an important line of work that we are doing in the chair. So for example, in the chair and through extensive psychophysics experiment, we have this ability to extract the human importance map. So this kind of maps highlight the features that are considered the more important by human being to classify an image. And once we have extracted this kind of map, we can force a neural network to pay attention to the same kind of features than those of humans. So meaning that at the end of this process, the neural network is going to be aligned on the human strategy. And interestingly, this kind of aligned neural network are showing greater robustness, so meaning it is harder to fool them with the same kind of experiment I have shown you at the beginning of this presentation. So as you might have observed in the share, we are dealing with plenty of different projects. But just for the sake of clarity here, I'm going to focus on one single project called the One-Shot Drawing Project. This project is representative to what we are doing in the chair because here we are combining task and evaluation framework from cognitive science, but also XAI and psychophysics to compare humans and machines. So in this project, we compare generative models and human on the one-shot drawing task. So what's the one-shot drawing task? So this task involves generating new variations belonging to categories that are exemplified with one unique sample. Those example samples are called the exemplars and are highlighted here in orange. During the training phase, the goal of the model is to learn a mapping between the exemplar and the variation. And then during the testing phase, we provide the model with novel exemplar. And this is really important to say that those exemplar has never been seen during the training phase. And then the model has to evaluate the distribution of images that would represent the variation, and those variations has to belong to the same categories as those of their corresponding exemplar. So yeah, so this task is interesting for two main reasons. So first, it offers us a leveled play field to compare humans and generative models on the one-shot drawing task. And second, this kind of task requires a high level of generalization. Indeed, you need to keep in mind that during the testing process, the model has to estimate an entire distribution from one single sample. This is formally under constraint, so meaning that the model will have to leverage prior knowledge in order to properly solve the one-shot drawing task. So in this project, we have leveraged two different datasets. So first, the Omniglot dataset that represents handwritten drawings from different, handwritten letters, from different alphabets, and the QuickDraw dataset composed of simple sketches representing various object categories. So to compare humans and machine on the one-shot drawing task, here again, we are inspired by cognitive science. So here we evaluate the samples produced during the testing phase along two different axes, their recognizability and their originality. The recognizability assesses if the samples produced during the testing phase fall within the same decision boundary than their corresponding exemplar. And this is quantified using the classification accuracy of a one-shot classifier. The originality measures the mean distance computed in an adequate projection space between the exemplar and their corresponding variation. So basically, in the rest of the presentation, I will call a sample original when this sample is going to be very dissimilar from its exemplar. So intuitively, a model that has well generalized to the testing categories should produce samples that span the maximum possible space within the classifier decision boundary. So such a model should fall on the top right corner of the recognizability versus originality framework. Bad generalization situation occurs when the sample fall either outside of the decision boundary or when they all accumulate near the exemplar. In that specific situation, the model has just learned to copy the exemplar, and this is definitely a bad sign in terms of generalization. So here in this slide, we systematically compare the three main families of generative models. So we are considering the VAEs, variational autoencoder, the GANs, generative adversarial network, and the diffusion models. So here you can see the result for two different GANs algorithms. So importantly, in this slide, all the data points that have the same colors correspond to the same models, but with different hyperparameters. So for example, different learning rate or different architecture. And just to keep a fair comparison between the different type of models, we have highlighted with bigger data point the models that have approximately the same number of parameters. So here you can observe that the samples produced by the GANs algorithm tend to have a low originality, but a high recognizability. So it does suggest that those samples tend to be very similar to their corresponding exemplar. And here we consider the VAEs model, so represented with bluish data point. You can observe that the samples produced by the VAEs are more original, but at a cost of a reduced recognizability. And this specific observation is very interesting because it could be related to the respective loss function of the VAEs or the GANs. So the evidence lower bound loss function of the VAE tend to cover all possible modes of the data distribution. So therefore, it will tend to put mass in spurious region of the distribution. So said differently, it will tend to overgeneralize and thus to provide samples that are more original than those observed in the training distribution. Concerning the GAN, so here this is an adversarial loss, and the adversarial loss tend to put excessive mass on the more likely mode of the data distribution, and then it will tend to discard the secondary modes. And this is interesting because our framework, the originality versus recognizability space, well capture this interesting phenomenon. So here in this slide, I have added one type of model, which are the diffusion models. So here represented with greenish data point. And you can observe that the samples produced by diffusion model are more recognizable than other models, but also more original than the samples produced by the GANs algorithm. And interestingly, among all tested families of model, this is actually the diffusion model that best approximates the human performance. So here, the human is shown with a gray star. So let's now have a qualitative look at the sample produced by the diffusion models and by humans. So here in this slide, I'm showing 4 pairs of samples, and in each of those pairs, one has been drawn by a human being and the other one has been produced by a diffusion model. So here are the results. So highlighted in green are the samples drawn by humans, and you can observe that it is really hard to tell apart the sample generated by humans or by machine. So it does suggest that actually diffusion models have started to bridge the gap with human. But one need to keep in mind that the more an image is original, the more it's getting harder to recognize it. So to account for this phenomenon, I am introducing the notion of generalization curve. A generalization curve is nothing very complicated. It is just a description of the evolution of the recognizability as a function of the sample's originality. So far in the previous slide, I have described models with one single data point. This is what you can see on the right-hand side of this slide. But now I'm going to describe a model with an entire continuum of data points. So those curves are called the generalization curves. And here you can observe in black the human generalization curve, and in green the generalization curve obtained for two types of diffusion models. So the light green curve corresponds to what we call a DDPM, so a denoising diffusion probabilistic model. This kind of diffusion model could be considered as a baseline because this is simply conditioned on the exemplar. The darker green curve corresponds to a CFGDM, so this is an extension of the DDPM in which we are guiding the diffusion process using the gradient of a classifier. So here we can observe that the low originality samples tend to be, the recognizability of the low originality sample tend to be well approximated by the diffusion model. Indeed, you can observe that on the right-hand side of this plot, that diffusion model well approximate the human's generalization curve. But as we move toward the right-hand side, you can observe a drop in the recognizability of the diffusion model. So it does suggest that humans, differently from diffusion model, have this ability to create samples that are original and recognizable in the same time. So obviously, now the next step is to understand where this difference in performance is coming from. And to do so, we have dig deeper into the impedance feature map. So once again, the impedance feature map are the maps that highlight the more diagnostic features, so both for humans and for machine, to solve a classification task. So for human, we have collected the impedance feature map using the Click Me challenge. So in this experiment, participants are shown with drawings and are asked to locate the features that they believe are the more important to categorize the image. As the participants select those important regions, those regions are gradually revealed, starting from a blank canvas and then iteratively passed to a classifier. And then the participants get rewarded whenever the classifier has properly classified the canvas before the runtime is up. And at the end of this process, we have this kind of heat maps in which the pixel intensities encode for the probability of being painted by the participant. And this is interesting because actually we can have similar maps for the algorithms. And here we have derived attribution methods that are specifically tailored for diffusion model to have the diffusion model attribution maps. And here in this slide, you can see the impedance feature map for diffusion model on the left-hand side, but also for humans on the right-hand side. And you can observe that, so here, just for the sake of clarity, I have overlaid those heat maps with their corresponding exemplar. And you can observe that humans tend to rely on fewer, but also on more localized features than diffusion model. So it does suggest that these features, so those highlighted in red here, are strongly discriminative, and that the rest of the features, so those that are not highlighted in red, are actually free to vary without impacting the classification prediction. This attentional strategy gives room for creativity and might explain why humans, differently from diffusion models, have this ability to create samples that are original and recognizable in the same time. So now let's wrap up. So here in this presentation, we have leveraged a framework from cognitive science to compare humans and machine on generative tasks. So here, this framework is composed with a task. so the one-shot drawing task, and an evaluation framework called the originality versus recognizability framework. We have leveraged this framework and we have to compare different type of models, and we have observed that diffusion models have started to bridge the gap between humans and machine on this one-shot drawing task. But this type of model still fails at modeling the recognizability of the more original samples. So to dig deeper and to understand the different strategies adopted by humans and machine, we have visualized the importance feature map, and we have observed that indeed humans and machine are adopting different attentional strategies. And in particular, humans tend to focus on localized features, which is not the case of diffusion models. So thank you for your attention, and here are the articles of the chair produced for the last 3 years, and feel free to ask any question.
Thank you very much, Victor. Yes, question, Rachid?
Thank you. Very interesting. I have just a question. In your one-shot drawing, systematically the images mean something for the human. You know, an apple, a knife, something. So there is a kind of a lamp. There is a kind of semantic interpretation before doing the generalization. So did you try? So I assume you don't give this information to the machine, or yes? And second, if you don't, did you try a drawing that has no meaning for a human as an initial, as an exemplar?
So thanks. That's actually a really good question. So I will start by the second question. And yes, we have tried some meaningless shapes. And the kind of result I'm showing here are still holding. But indeed, you are right. Us as a human being, we are leveraging a semantic prior. And so the next step here is to include this semantic prior in this kind of neural network. And we are now working at including languages to include this kind of prior.
Yes. How about
yes. So could you go back to this heat map? Yes, this one. Because it's quite interesting to see the differences between the two. But isn't that also our ability to distinguish between details? If I go back to my own stuff on species, I mean, we would look on certain details to be able to distinguish between different species or different races. Here you are mainly on rather simple shapes, but to go further, you would need to look into things. And I think it's built into us to recognize many more information than your models would. So what would be your next steps in that regard?
So first, I'm not the first one to show this kind of result on human being. It's been demonstrated by plenty of psychophysics experiments that actually you only need a small part of an image to be able to recognize it to be able to classify this image. But also, one really important point here is that this kind of map are evaluating the features important for classification. And just keep in mind that here I'm dealing with generation task. So here it does suggest that for classification, models and human are not adopting the same strategy. But just as a workaround, I have derived the classification model from the generative one, just to have this kind of map. So that might answer your question here, that actually the features you observed here are not pretty aligned with what you are used to for as a human being.
Going on continuing the question, what if you add a sparsity term to your generative model?
That's also a really good question. So So now the way I'm doing, I'm just using diffusion model in the pixel space. So the pixel space here is naturally sparse just because this is white and black and white images. But here the next step is not anymore to do diffusion model in the pixel space, but in the latent space. And the good news is that once I would be able to do that, I would be able to control for the shape of the latent space. So meaning, for example, adding sparsity, but also adding plenty of different priors to test if these priors are actually improving the generalization abilities of the underlying diffusion model. So that's the next step.
I have a question on frugality. You try to bridge the gap between human and machines on this performance measure and detecting and finding why a decision is taken. What would be the order of magnitude of the energy that you need for human and for computer on this? And is also a line of research that you are following, and what would be your guess for the future on that?
So yeah, I do think that bio-inspiration in general could definitely improve in terms of frugality, and for many different reasons. So for example, we were speaking about sparsity. Sparsity is definitely a prior in the brain, so meaning that all the neurons are not firing in the same time. So this is the kind of prior that we can include in models to make them more bio-inspired on one hand, but also more frugal on the other one. But also, and as I have shown at the beginning of the presentation, we are trying to leverage some brain mechanisms. So here I spoke about the compositionality that helps neural network to be trained with as few data as possible. So yeah, we are working on frugality. I think this is, so as a brain, we have some limitation, and those limitations, I mean, in terms of energy, in terms of etc., and so it induces some priors, and it would be great to be able to transfer those priors in machine learning models to make them more frugal and more efficient.
So if no more question, we move to the next. Yeah, thank you very much, Victor, for your talk.